From the air, it looks like just another mountain rising quietly from the plains of Colorado. Pine trees cling to its slopes. Snow dusts its peaks in winter. Cars pass nearby without slowing down, unaware that beneath this solid mass of granite lies one of the most secretive structures ever built by the United States government. Cheyenne Mountain does not announce itself. It does not warn you. It simply waits. The camera drifts closer, the sound of wind fading into a low, mechanical hum. What appears natural, ancient, and immovable is, in fact, carefully chosen for one reason: survival. During the darkest years of the Cold War, when nuclear war felt not hypothetical but inevitable, American military planners searched for a place that could endure the unthinkable. They found it here inside a mountain strong enough to absorb shock waves, radiation, and the collapse of the world above. As the image cuts from sunlight to darkness, steel replaces stone. Massive blast doors, each weighing more than a fully loaded tank, seal off a hidden world carved deep into solid rock. Behind them exists not a bunker, but a city, a self-contained underground fortress designed to remain operational, even after a nuclear detonation. Air can be filtered, water can be purified, power can be sustained, and life, at least for a chosen few, could continue. The sound of a radar pulse echoes softly, steady, and relentless. This mountain was not built to hide people, it was built to watch the sky. From within Cheyenne Mountain, military operators once tracked every aircraft, every missile launch, every object crossing North American airspace. In an era where a single warning could mean the difference between survival and extinction, this place became the nervous system of continental defense. Yet for decades, most Americans never knew what lay beneath their feet. No signs, no explanations, only rumors, redacted documents, and a mountain that refused to give up its secrets. Even today, much of what happens inside remains classified, protected not only by concrete and steel, but by silence. Cheyenne Mountain is more than geology. It is fear made permanent, strategy turned into stone, a reminder of a time when humanity prepared not for victory, but for endurance after the end. And as long as the mountain stands, the fortress inside it remains ready just in case the unthinkable ever becomes real. In the years following World War II, victory did not bring peace, it brought a new kind of fear. By the early 1952, the United States found itself locked in a silent confrontation with a former ally, the Soviet Union. This was not a war fought with armies crossing borders, but one measured in megatons, missile ranges, and minutes to impact. It was the beginning of the Cold War, and at its core was a single terrifying possibility: nuclear annihilation without warning. Black and white footage fills the screen. Children line up beneath school desks during civil defense drills. Families study fallout shelter signs posted on city streets. Sirens wail in test alerts, their echo designed to imprint panic into muscle memory. The message was clear: an attack could come at any moment, and there would be no time to prepare. Unlike previous wars, there would be no front lines. Every city was a target. By the mid-1950s, both superpowers possessed hydrogen bombs capable of destroying entire metropolitan areas in seconds. Long-range bombers patrolled the skies day and night, while intercontinental ballistic missiles promised devastation delivered from across the globe. American defense planners began to accept a grim reality. If the Soviet Union launched a surprise strike, the first explosions might eliminate leadership, communication, and command before a response could even be ordered. Maps appear on screen: North America, overlaid with red arcs and blast circles. Lines stretch from Soviet territory across the Arctic, tracing the fastest routes for bombers and missiles. Strategic analysts calculated flight times down to the minute: 15 minutes, 12, sometimes less. The fear was not just destruction, but blindness, the idea that an attack could arrive unseen, undetected, unstoppable. This anxiety seeped into every layer of American society. Newspapers speculated about the day after. Popular films portrayed empty cities and radioactive wastelands. Government pamphlets instructed citizens how to survive on canned food beneath layers of concrete. Yet, behind the public messaging was a deeper, more urgent concern within the military. How to ensure that the United States could still see, think, and respond after the first strike. Radar became the front line. Early warning systems were rushed into development, stretching across Canada and the northern United States. Massive antennas scanned the skies, searching for Soviet bombers approaching over the pole. Later, satellites and missile detection systems would expand that reach into space. But all of these systems faced the same vulnerability. They were exposed. A single nuclear detonation near a command center could cripple the entire defense network. Shockwaves, electromagnetic pulses, and radiation threatened not only cities, but the very ability to understand what was happening. Without information, retaliation would be impossible. Deterrence would fail, and failure, in this context, meant extinction. It was within this atmosphere of constant dread that a new philosophy took hold: survival through concealment. Critical command structures would need to be buried, hardened, and isolated from the surface world. They would have to withstand direct nuclear blasts and continue operating independently for weeks, even months. The Cold War demanded not just weapons, but sanctuaries. As sirens fade into a low, ominous tone, the footage shifts from open skies to solid rock. Mountains, once symbols of permanence and stability, began to look like shields. Nature itself could become armor. In the escalating chess match between Washington and Moscow, the next move was clear. To survive a nuclear war, America would have to disappear into the earth itself. Choosing the right place to hide the nerve center of American defense was not a matter of convenience or symbolism, but a calculation rooted in physics, geology, and geography. During the height of the Cold War, military planners understood that survival after a nuclear strike would depend on three things: protection, isolation, and endurance. Cheyenne Mountain, located near Colorado Springs, emerged as the rare location where all three could be achieved at once. On the surface, it appeared unremarkable, just another ridge in the Rocky Mountains, but beneath its slopes lay a geological foundation that had been forming for more than 1 billion years, solid granite among the hardest and most stable rock on Earth. Unlike softer sedimentary layers, granite could absorb and disperse immense shock energy, making it uniquely suited to withstand the concussive force of a nearby nuclear explosion. Animated cross-section graphics reveal the mountain as a massive natural shield, hundreds of meters thick, capable of protecting anything hidden inside from blast waves, heat, and radiation that would obliterate surface structures in seconds. Location mattered just as much as stone. Cheyenne Mountain sits deep within the continental United States, far from coastlines that would be the first targets of enemy bombers and missiles. A nuclear strike against major ports, industrial hubs, or political capitals was expected, but central Colorado offered distance, time, and strategic depth. Even if an attack crossed the Pleiade, Arctic, and detonated over North America, Cheyenne Mountain would likely remain outside the immediate kill zone. This central positioning also reduced vulnerability to follow-up strikes, ensuring that command and control could persist when other facilities were silent. Maps of the United States fade in, highlighting how the mountain lies away from major population centers, yet close enough to critical infrastructure and military installations to remain operational. Equally important was what surrounded the mountain rather than what stood on top of it. Unlike urban areas, Colorado Springs provided natural isolation, wide-open terrain, and a relatively low civilian population. This reduced the risk of collateral damage and made secrecy easier to maintain. Construction could be concealed as military expansion rather than a doomsday project. The surrounding land allowed secure access points, power, connections and transportation routes without drawing public attention. The mountain itself acted as camouflage, hiding one of the most important installations in the nation behind an ordinary natural landscape. The internal structure of Cheyenne Mountain was another decisive factor. Engineers determined that the granite was not only strong but predictable, allowing precise calculations for excavation and reinforcement. The rock would not fracture unpredictably or collapse under stress. This made it possible to carve vast chambers, tunnels, and caverns while maintaining long-term stability. Overlaid diagrams show how entire buildings could be suspended within the mountain, isolated from vibration by massive steel springs, allowing them to move independently if shockwaves passed through the rock. The mountain would take the hit, and the city inside would survive. Survivability extended beyond blast resistance. Cheyenne Mountain offered natural protection against radiation. Its depth and density dramatically reduced radioactive penetration, meaning personnel inside could remain safe, even as fallout blanketed the surface. Ventilation systems could be routed through long filtered shafts, while water could be stored or sourced securely underground. The mountain provided not just shelter but the foundation for a self-sustaining environment capable of operating in isolation for extended periods of time. In a nuclear war scenario where resupply from the outside might be impossible, this mattered as much as any weapon. There was also a psychological dimension to the choice. In an age defined by uncertainty and invisible threats, a mountain represented permanence. It could not be moved easily, targeted precisely, or erased from the map. In contrast to above-ground bases that advertised their importance, Cheyenne Mountain offered invisibility and endurance. The enemy could know it existed and still struggle to destroy it. That uncertainty itself became a strategic advantage. When all factors were weighed, no other location offered the same combination of geological strength, geographic safety, and operational feasibility. Cheyenne Mountain was not chosen because it was dramatic or remote, but because it was resilient. It was a place where the United States could continue to see, think, and respond, even after absorbing a blow meant to end civilization. The decision to build there transformed a quiet Colorado mountain into one of the most fortified and consequential locations on Earth, even if to this day it still looks like nothing more than stone and trees on the surface. The decision to build inside Cheyenne Mountain transformed the project from an engineering challenge into a mission wrapped in silence. Once the site was selected, the question was no longer whether it could be done, but how to carve a functioning city more than 600 meters into solid granite without revealing its true purpose to the world. Construction began in the late 1952, at the height of Cold War tension, when secrecy was considered as critical as concrete and steel. Officially, the site was described as a military facility expansion. Unofficially, very few people were ever told what they were really helping to build. Black and white footage captures the early days of excavation. Long lines of trucks wind their way toward the mountain, carrying equipment, explosives, and supplies. Massive drilling machines bite into the rock, sending clouds of dust pouring out of freshly cut tunnels. The work was relentless. Crews operated around the clock, drilling, blasting, and hauling millions of tons of granite out of the mountain. Each blast had to be carefully calculated. Too much force could fracture the surrounding rock. Too little would slow progress. Every meter gained came at the cost of time, precision, and risk. Thousands of workers were involved in the project, yet almost none of them had a complete picture of what they were constructing. Tasks were compartmentalized. One crew drilled access tunnels, another reinforced cavern walls. Others installed wiring, plumbing, or ventilation systems. Few were allowed beyond their assigned zones. Security checkpoints controlled movement. Guards monitored entrances. Cameras and ID badges tracked who went where and when. Even casual conversation was discouraged. In an era before digital surveillance, control depended on discipline and silence. The scale of the excavation was unprecedented. Engineers were not carving simple corridors or bunkers, but enormous chambers large enough to house multi-story buildings. These caverns had to be perfectly shaped, reinforced, and stabilized to last for decades under constant stress. Dust filled the air. The noise of drills echoed endlessly through the rock. Workers labored in conditions that were dark, cramped, and physically punishing. Yet deadlines were unforgiving. The Cold War did not pause, and every delay was seen as a vulnerability. Security surrounding the project extended far beyond the mountain itself. Construction schedules, blueprints, and supply orders were classified. Materials were routed through approved channels to avoid raising suspicion. Even waste rock removed from the mountain was carefully managed, dispersed, and disguised as routine construction debris. From the outside, there was no obvious sign that one of the most advanced military installations in the world was taking shape beneath the surface. As the tunnels expanded, the mountain slowly revealed its interior geometry. Main access routes were driven deep into the granite, branching into secondary corridors and massive caverns. The design followed a strict logic. Redundancy was built into everything. Multiple access points, backup systems, and reinforced zones ensured that no single failure could cripple the entire complex. The deeper the excavation went, the more the mountain became both obstacle and protector. One of the greatest challenges was vibration. Engineers understood that a nearby nuclear explosion would send shockwaves through the rock, potentially destroying anything rigidly attached to it. The solution was radical. Instead of anchoring buildings directly to the mountain, entire structures would be isolated from it. Foundations were designed to support massive steel springs, allowing buildings to float independently within the caverns. This concept influenced every stage of construction. Floors, walls, and support systems were all built with movement in mind. Despite the danger and secrecy, accidents were rare, a testament to the discipline imposed on the site. Safety protocols were strict, not only to protect workers, but to prevent delays that could compromise national defense. Every mistake was costly. Every correction was logged, reviewed, and secured. As years passed, the raw tunnels evolved into a hidden world of reinforced chambers and protected spaces. What began as an act of excavation became an act of transformation. A mountain that had stood untouched for millions of years was reshaped from the inside out, not for exploration or industry, but for survival. By the time construction neared completion, Cheyenne Mountain was no longer just rock. It was architecture, strategy, and fear made permanent. Built in silence, hidden in plain sight, and designed for a war that everyone hoped would never come, the fortress inside the mountain stood ready, long before the public ever knew it existed. What emerged from the darkness inside Cheyenne Mountain was not a single bunker or a narrow maze of tunnels, but something far more complex and unexpected, a fully functioning city sealed within solid rock. As excavation gave way to construction, the interior caverns were transformed into vast, open spaces illuminated by artificial light, revealing an underground environment unlike anything built before. In place of raw stone stood roads, walkways, control rooms, and living quarters, arranged with the logic of an urban center rather than a military shelter. This was not a place meant for temporary refuge. It was designed for continuity. At the heart of the complex stood 15 separate buildings each, constructed as an independent structure rather than carved extensions of the mountain. 3D animation reveals these buildings suspended within the caverns, supported by massive steel springs and shock isolators. The design was deliberate. In the event of a nuclear blast, shock waves would travel through the granite at tremendous speed. Any structure rigidly attached to the rock would absorb that energy and likely collapse. By isolating the buildings, engineers allowed them to move independently, absorbing motion rather than resisting it. The mountain could shake, and the city inside could survive. Each building served a specific purpose. Operations centers housed radar displays and communication systems. Living quarters provided bunks, kitchens, and medical facilities. power and water management buildings ensured self-sufficiency, while command offices coordinated national defense pathways connected these structures like streets, creating a sense of order and familiarity beneath the mountain. Fluorescent lights cast a cold, even glow, replacing sunlight with something constant and controlled. There were no windows, no weather, no sense of time passing except through clocks and rotating shifts. The scale of the caverns defied expectations. High ceilings stretched upward, disappearing into shadow. Steel beams crossed overhead and ventilation ducts ran like arteries through the space. The environment was engineered to feel stable, predictable and safe despite its location, hundreds of meters. Underground temperature, humidity, and air quality were carefully regulated. The city was meant to function continuously, regardless of what was happening on the surface above, whether that meant peace, routine operations, or the aftermath of nuclear war. Life inside the mountain followed a rhythm defined by duty and isolation. Personnel assigned to Cheyenne Mountain could spend days or weeks underground without ever seeing daylight. The design accounted for this psychological strain. Color choices, lighting intensity, and spatial layout were all considered in an effort to reduce fatigue and disorientation. The city was not built for comfort, but it was built for endurance. Even small details such as painted walls, signage, and designated rest areas reflected an understanding that people would have to live and think clearly in. An environment cut off from the outside world, the shock isolation system remained the most extraordinary feature of the underground city. The steel springs supporting each building weighed thousands of tons and were engineered to compress and rebound in response to seismic energy. During tests, entire structures were observed shifting subtly as designed, proving that the concept worked. The city could move as a living system, absorbing violence without breaking. This was architecture adapted to apocalypse, a rare fusion of engineering and foresight driven by fear of the unthinkable. Cameras glide through digital reconstructions, showing the contrast between raw granite walls and the ordered geometry of the city within. Cables run in disciplined lines. Floors are marked with functional precision, and machinery hums quietly in the background. The space feels less like a cave and more like a machine one, designed to monitor the world above while remaining invisible to it. Despite its complexity, the underground city was never meant to grow, expand, or evolve. It was frozen in purpose, built for a specific moment in history when survival depended on readiness and secrecy. Every corridor, every building, and every system existed to support one mission, maintaining command and control. No matter what happened outside the mountain, Cheyenne Mountain's underground city stands as a reminder of how far nations were willing to go to protect themselves during the Cold War. It is a place where fear was translated into steel and stone, where urban design met nuclear strategy. Hidden beneath layers of granite, the city waits silently, its lights capable of turning on at any moment, prepared to function when the surface world might not. The mountain above may look unchanged, but inside it holds a city, built to endure the end of everything familiar. Survival was the central principle behind every decision made inside Cheyenne Mountain. Nothing within the complex was designed for convenience or appearance. Everything existed to answer one question: what happens after a nuclear explosion? While cities above ground would be reduced to fire and ash, the fortress inside the mountain was engineered to remain alive, functional, and isolated from a world turned hostile. The first line of defense appears at the entrances. Massive steel blast doors dominate the tunnels leading into the complex. Each door weighs approximately 25 tons and is mounted on hinges so precisely balanced that a single person can move it despite its size. When closed, these doors seal the interior from shockwaves, heat, and radiation. Their purpose is not only to block the force of an explosion, but maintain pressure, integrity, preventing contaminated air from being pulled inside. Close-up footage captures the slow, deliberate movement of steel meeting steel, followed by a deep, resonant impact, a sound that signifies absolute separation from the surface world. Beyond the doors, the mountain itself becomes armor. Hundreds of meters of granite, absorb blast energy, dispersing it harmlessly through solid rock. Engineers calculated that even a nearby nuclear detonation would fail to penetrate this natural barrier. The fortress was built to endure not just one strike, but the chaotic aftermath of multiple explosions, seismic activity, and electromagnetic disruption. The complex was designed to remain operational when external infrastructure, power grids, and communication networks were destroyed. Air was treated as a critical resource. Inside Cheyenne Mountain, specialized filtration systems were installed to remove radioactive particles, chemical agents, and biological contaminants. Intake shafts extend deep into the mountain, routing air through multiple layers of filters and pressure-controlled chambers. Even in a contaminated environment, the air inside could remain breathable for extended periods. The system was designed to function independently, without reliance on external power, ensuring that life inside the mountain would not depend on the survival of the outside world. Water followed the same philosophy of isolation and redundancy. Large reserves were stored within the complex, protected from surface contamination and supplemented by secure underground sources. Treatment systems purified and recycled water, maintaining a closed loop that could sustain personnel for weeks or months. This meant that even if rivers, reservoirs, and municipal systems were rendered unusable, the underground city could continue to function without interruption. Food storage was equally deliberate. Supplies were stockpiled in sealed environments, calculated to support a full operational crew during extended lockdown scenarios. Rations were chosen for shelf life, nutritional efficiency, and minimal waste. The goal was not comfort, but survival. Every calorie, every container, and every storage room was part of a carefully modeled equation, predicting how long the complex could remain sealed if the surface became uninhabitable. Power generation and distribution were built with the assumption that the outside grid would fail. Backup generators, fuel reserves, and redundant electrical systems ensured continuous operation. Lighting, communications, radar, and life support could all function independently for prolonged periods. The fortress was designed to remain aware even if the nation it served was temporarily blind. Perhaps most remarkable was how these systems worked together as a single organism. Sensors monitored air quality, water purity, temperature, and structural stability in real time. Operators could isolate sections of the complex, seal off compromised areas, and redirect resources as needed. This level of control transformed the fortress from a static shelter into a living system capable of adapting to crisis. The psychological impact of such design cannot be ignored. The sound of a blast door closing was more than mechanical. It was symbolic, marking the moment when the outside world became irrelevant and survival depended entirely on what existed inside the mountain. In that moment, Cheyenne Mountain became not just a defensive structure, but a lifeboat for command and continuity. Built for a scenario that everyone hoped would never occur, the complex stands as one of the most extreme examples of Cold War engineering. It represents a belief that even in the face of nuclear destruction, order could be preserved, decisions could still be made, and humanity could endure beneath layers of steel, stone, and silence. Deep within Cheyenne Mountain lay the true purpose of the fortress, not merely survival, but awareness. This was the home of NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, a joint U.S. and Canadian military organization created to answer a single, terrifying question: are we under attack? In an age when nuclear war could begin without warning, NORAD became the eyes and ears of an entire continent, watching the skies every second of every day. During the Cold War, the threat did not arrive with marching armies or visible fleets. It came silently from above, carried by bombers and later by intercontinental ballistic missiles traveling at unimaginable speed. NORAD's mission was to detect those threats early enough to respond. From inside, the mountain operators monitored a vast network of radar stations stretching across North America from the Arctic Circle to the southern United States. These stations fed a constant stream of data into Cheyenne Mountain, creating a real-time picture of the airspace above the continent. Inside the operations center, rows of consoles glowed with the soft green light of cathode ray tube screens. Radar sweeps pulsed rhythmically, painting moving dots across circular displays. Each signal represented an aircraft, a test launch, or a potential enemy intrusion. Analysts tracked trajectories, speeds, and altitudes, calculating intent within seconds. The atmosphere was controlled, quiet, disciplined because hesitation could mean catastrophe. In the early years, the primary threat came from long-range Soviet bombers expected to approach over the polar region. NORAD radar lines were oriented northward, scanning the most likely routes of attack. As technology evolved, so did the mission. By the 1,960 seconds and 1,970 seconds, ballistic missiles became the dominant concern. Unlike bombers, missiles offered almost no warning time. Detecting a launch quickly became the difference between retaliation and annihilation. This forced NORAD to expand beyond air defense into space-based detection missile. Warning systems were integrated into the complex feeding data from satellites and ground sensors into a centralized command environment. Operators were trained to distinguish between real attacks, equipment malfunctions, and natural phenomena. A flock of birds, a software error, or a reflected signal could all mimic a threat. The responsibility carried by those watching the screens was enormous. A single misinterpretation could trigger a chain reaction leading to global disaster. Cheyenne Mountain was chosen as NORAD's headquarters precisely. Because of this responsibility, the command center needed to survive long enough to confirm an attack, assess its scale, and communicate with national leadership. Even if Washington were destroyed, even if surface bases were lost, the eyes on the sky had to remain open. The mountain ensured that radar, data, decision-making, and communication could continue when everything else failed. Communication systems inside the complex were hardened and redundant, allowing NORAD to relay warnings and receive orders under extreme conditions. Secure lines connected the mountain to military commands, strategic forces, and allied governments. The fortress functioned as a hub where information converged, was analyzed, and transformed into action. In this role, Cheyenne Mountain became less a bunker and more a brain. Throughout the Cold War, NORAD experienced moments that tested its systems and its people. False alarms occurred, sometimes caused by computer errors, sometimes by misinterpreted data. On more than one occasion, radar screens suggested an incoming attack that did not exist. Each time, operators were forced to make rapid judgments under intense pressure. These incidents underscored why Cheyenne Mountain mattered. The environment was built to reduce chaos, maintain clarity, and prevent panic when seconds mattered. Beyond nuclear warning, NORAD also tracked routine air traffic, space debris, and later satellites orbiting the Earth. The mission expanded, but the core purpose remained constant. Vigilance. The glowing green screens, the steady hum of electronics, and the constant flow of data became symbols of a world permanently on edge. Cheyenne Mountain and NORAD represented a new kind of warfare, one fought not with visible battles, but with information detection and decision-making. The eyes on the sky did not fire weapons. They watched, they calculated, and they waited, prepared to confirm the moment humanity's most destructive capability was unleashed. Hidden beneath granite, the operators of NORAD stood guard, not over territory, but over time itself, measuring minutes, seconds, and moments that could decide the fate of the world. Beneath the layers of granite and steel, the most fragile element of Cheyenne Mountain was not machinery or infrastructure, but the people who lived and worked inside it. While the complex was designed to survive nuclear war, it also had to sustain human beings tasked with making clear decisions under extraordinary pressure. Life underground was defined by routine discipline and isolation, far removed from the world on the surface. For soldiers, engineers, and technicians assigned to the mountain, the transition was immediate. Long corridors stretched ahead, illuminated by cold fluorescent lighting that never changed with time of day. There were no windows, no natural sound, and no sense of weather. Outside the mountain, the sun might rise or snow might fall, but inside the environment remained constant, controlled, and artificial. The absence of daylight forced personnel to rely on clocks, schedules, and shift rotations to maintain a sense of normalcy. Sleeping quarters were functional and minimal. Rows of bunks lined narrow rooms designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Personal space was limited, storage was sparse, and privacy was rare. Beds were stacked close together, a reminder that the mountain was not a home but a duty station. Rest was scheduled and monitored because fatigue could compromise performance. In a facility where minutes could decide the fate of millions, mental sharpness was treated as a strategic asset. Daily life followed a strict rhythm. Shifts rotated around the clock, ensuring that critical systems were always staffed. Meals were taken at designated times in shared dining areas, where conversation was subdued and purposeful. Food was simple, designed to meet nutritional needs rather than provide variety. Recreation existed but was limited. A small gym, a television room, occasional reading materials. These were not luxuries but tools to maintain morale and psychological stability during extended periods underground. The engineers who maintained the complex carried a unique burden. Their responsibility was to keep life support, power, and communication systems operating without interruption. Even minor failures could have serious consequences. Maintenance was constant, conducted in narrow service tunnels behind walls, beneath floors, and above ceilings. The sound of footsteps in long hallways, the low hum of ventilation systems, and the distant echo of machinery formed the background noise of daily existence. Psychological strain was an ever-present concern. Extended confinement, lack of natural light, and the knowledge of what the facility was built for weighed heavily on those inside. Training addressed this directly. Personnel were prepared not only for technical tasks, but for the mental challenge of isolation. Team cohesion, discipline, and trust were emphasized because the environment allowed little room for emotional instability. Despite the seriousness of their mission, moments of normal life persisted. Birthdays were acknowledged, holidays were quietly observed, and camaraderie developed among those who shared the same confined world. Friendships formed in break rooms and during shift changes. These small human connections helped counterbalance the enormity of the responsibility they carried. The design of the complex reflected an understanding of these human needs. Hallways were wide enough to avoid a sense of claustrophobia. Walls were painted in neutral tones, and lighting was calibrated to reduce eye strain. Signage was clear and consistent, helping newcomers orient themselves in a place where disorientation could be dangerous. Even the layout of workspaces was planned to encourage focus and reduce stress. For many who served inside Cheyenne Mountain, the experience was both isolating and defining. They lived with the constant awareness that if the worst ever happened, they might never leave the mountain. Their role was not to fight a war but to endure it, to remain alert when the outside world might be burning. Life underground revealed the true purpose of Cheyenne Mountain. It was not just a fortress of steel and stone, but a test of human resilience. In the absence of sunlight and certainty, it relied on discipline, cooperation, and quiet professionalism. The people who walked those long corridors, slept in those narrow bunks, and worked beneath cold artificial light were the final safeguard between fear and chaos, waiting in silence for a warning they hoped would never come. There were moments inside Cheyenne Mountain when the unthinkable seemed to arrive, not with fire or shock waves, but with a signal on a screen and the sound of an alarm. In those moments, the Cold War stopped being abstract strategy and became immediate, terrifying reality. The sirens that echoed through the complex were designed for one purpose: to announce that nuclear war might have begun. On those days, the atmosphere inside the mountain changed instantly. Routine vanished. Voices lowered, movements sharpened. Every person understood what the alarm could mean. Within minutes, operators were locked into their station's eyes fixed on glowing radar screens, hands hovering over controls, trained for this exact scenario. The difference between history and extinction now rested on interpretation. Footage cuts rapidly between green radar displays, flashing warning indicators, red status lights illuminating, control panels, and a digital clock counting down seconds. Each second represented the shrinking window to confirm whether an attack was real. During the Cold War, missile flight times were brutally short. Once a launch was detected, there could be as little as 10 minutes to assess, decide, and respond. False hesitation could be fatal, but false certainty could be even worse. One of the most dangerous incidents occurred when early warning systems indicated what appeared to be a massive incoming Soviet missile attack. Radar screens showed multiple trajectories racing toward North America. Data flowed. In fast and incomplete, sirens sounded. Command protocols activated. Operators reported launch after launch. The scenario matched the worst fears planners had trained for years to face. Inside Cheyenne Mountain, the pressure was overwhelming. Analysts cross-checked feeds from different sensors, satellites. Radar lines and communication channels were scrutinized for confirmation. Senior officers prepared to notify national leadership. The chain of command moved forward step by step as designed. Yet uncertainty lingered. Something felt wrong. The data did not align perfectly. Timing was off. Patterns were inconsistent. As the countdown continued, every decision carried unimaginable weight. If the warning was real, delay would mean losing the ability to respond. If it was false, retaliation would unleash a war that could not be undone. The system demanded calm, clarity, and discipline under conditions designed to destroy all three. In one historic case, the cause was eventually traced to a technical error. A training tape mistakenly loaded into a live system simulating a full-scale nuclear attack. In another incident, a computer chip failure produced false missile launch data. In yet another, a satellite misinterpreted sunlight reflecting off clouds as missile exhaust. Each time the systems worked just enough, and the people behind them worked even better. The alarms stopped, the screens returned to normal, the countdown was halted, the world continued turning, unaware of how close it had come to catastrophe. Outside the mountain there were no explosions, no headlines, no public acknowledgement of how narrowly disaster had been avoided. Inside Cheyenne Mountain, the aftermath was silent. Operators remained at their stations. Procedures were reviewed. Logs were analyzed. Systems were corrected. But the psychological impact lingered. These were not drills. These were moments when the machinery of global annihilation almost activated. Based on imperfect information and human judgment, the incidents revealed a terrifying truth. Nuclear war did not require malice or intent. It could begin through error, misinterpretation, or coincidence. The responsibility placed on those watching the screens was almost unbearable. They were not just monitoring machines, they were safeguarding civilization itself. The fast pace of warning scenarios, the relentless countdowns, and the constant threat of false alarms defined the true tension of the Cold War. It was not fought in trenches or skies, but in rooms filled with blinking lights and people trained to remain calm while the world stood on the edge. Cheyenne Mountain was built to survive nuclear war, but these moments showed that survival depended as much on restraint as readiness. The sirens were meant to signal the end. Yet each time they proved something else, that even in an age of unimaginable weapons, humanity still relied on judgment, discipline, and the courage to say, wait. The day the sirens almost meant war did not end the world, but it revealed how fragile the line truly was between peace, annihilation, and how close it came to breaking in the quiet depths of a mountain waiting in silence beneath Colorado. As the Cold War faded into history, many assumed that places like Cheyenne Mountain would lose their purpose. The Soviet Union collapsed, nuclear tension appeared to recede, and the fortress inside the mountain seemed like a relic of a darker age. But Cheyenne Mountain did not close its doors. It did not become a museum, and it did not fade into irrelevance. Instead, it entered a new and far more ambiguous Phase 1, defined by silence, modernization, and unanswered questions. Today, official statements describe Cheyenne Mountain as a standby facility, a hardened backup to modern command centers located. Elsewhere, this description suggests readiness without constant occupation, a place that can be activated if needed. Yet what exactly that means remains deliberately vague. Some areas are said to be maintained at full operational capability, while others are reportedly placed in a reduced status kept functional but unmanned. The lack of clear public information fuels speculation. Is the mountain asleep, or is it quietly watching? Modern footage contrasts sharply with Cold War imagery. Fluorescent lighting has been replaced in some areas by upgraded systems. Digital screens sit where green radar displays once glowed. Fiber optic cables now run through tunnels, originally designed for analog equipment. Portions of the complex have been modernized to integrate with contemporary defense networks, capable of tracking not just aircraft and missiles, but satellites, cyber threats, and space debris. The mission has expanded even as visibility has narrowed. At the same time, access to the facility has become more restricted rather than less. Visitors are rare, cameras are prohibited, documentation is limited. What can be seen publicly is often carefully framed, showing hallways, control rooms, or entrances, without revealing how systems truly operate today. Blurred imagery and redacted details hint at ongoing relevance without confirming it. The mountain reveals just enough to remain credible while concealing its true capabilities. Strategically, the world has not become safer. Nuclear weapons still exist in large numbers, and new actors have entered the global stage. Hypersonic missiles, cyber warfare, and anti-satellite weapons present threats that Cold War designers never imagined. Cheyenne Mountain's original strength, its isolation, hardening, and self-sufficiency may be more valuable now than ever. In an age of digital vulnerability, physical protection offers a different kind of security. There is also a symbolic function to the mountain. Maintaining it signals continuity and preparedness. It reminds allies and adversaries alike that the infrastructure of last resort still exists, even if primary operations have moved elsewhere. The mountain remains a fallback, a place designed to function when others fail. This layered approach to defense reflects a modern understanding of resilience rather than reliance on a single system. Former personnel and defense analysts speak cautiously about the site. Some describe it as insurance, a facility you hope never to use but would never abandon. Others suggest that certain operations continue there, quietly integrated into broader defense architecture. These perspectives reinforce a single idea: Cheyenne Mountain was built to endure time as much as attack. The mountain itself remains unchanged from the outside. Pine-covered slopes still rise above Colorado Springs, offering no indication of what lies beneath. Cars pass by, hikers walk nearby, and life continues as if nothing extraordinary exists below the surface. That normalcy is part of the design. The fortress was meant to disappear into the landscape, and it still does. Whether fully active, partially maintained, or waiting for a future crisis, Cheyenne Mountain occupies a unique place in modern defense. It exists between eras, not fully past, not fully present. Its continued maintenance suggests that planners believe there are still scenarios where its capabilities would be essential. In a world increasingly dependent on vulnerable networks and visible infrastructure, the idea of a hidden, hardened command center retains its appeal. Cheyenne Mountain may no longer be the primary nerve center it once was, but its silence should not be mistaken for abandonment. The fortress inside the mountain was built to wait, and perhaps that is its most enduring function: to remain unseen, unspoken, and ready, a reminder that some preparations are never truly retired, only hidden deeper beneath layers of stone secrecy and time. As the sun sinks behind the mountains of Colorado, Cheyenne Mountain returns to silence. From the outside, it looks unchanged, timeless, and indifferent to the history buried within its stone. The traffic fades, the wind moves through the trees, and the day ends like any other. Yet beneath that calm exterior, the fortress remains exactly as it was designed to be, waiting. Cheyenne Mountain was never built for glory or victory. It was built for endurance, for the moment when everything familiar might collapse and only preparation would remain. Its existence is a reminder of how close humanity once stood to its own destruction, and how much effort was devoted not to winning a war, but to surviving its aftermath. The fortress does not celebrate power. It embodies caution, fear, and responsibility frozen into granite. The Cold War has passed, but the questions it raised have not. Nuclear weapons still exist. Technology has only shortened decision times, and the margin for error may be thinner than ever. Cheyenne Mountain stands as proof that civilization understood this once and acted accordingly. It represents a belief that even in the face of unimaginable danger, clear thinking, continuity, and restraint mattered. There is a lesson here beyond military strategy. The story of Cheyenne Mountain is about foresight, about planning for consequences rather than hoping they never arrive. It shows what happens when societies confront uncomfortable realities and invest in resilience rather than denial. At the same time, it forces us to ask whether such preparations reflect wisdom or fear, or perhaps both. As viewers, we are left to consider the paradox of the fortress. It exists to ensure survival, yet its very necessity reminds us of a failure of trust between nations. It is a monument to an era when silence and secrecy felt safer than openness and understanding. Whether that era is truly over remains an open question. Now we want to hear from you. What does Cheyenne Mountain represent in your view? Is it a symbol of human ingenuity and preparedness, or a warning about how close the world has come to self-destruction? Does its continued existence make you feel safer or more uneasy? Your perspective adds meaning to this story. If you found this documentary insightful, consider subscribing to the channel to support deeper explorations into hidden history and forgotten places. Like the video if it helped you see the Cold War from a new angle, and leave a comment to share your thoughts and reflections. Your engagement helps keep these stories alive. As night settles over the mountain and the music fades, Cheyenne Mountain remains where it has always been, unseen, uncelebrated, and ready. The fortress that waits does not ask for attention. It waits for a future no one wants, but one that history reminds us is never impossible.